You touch down at JFK after a long flight, returning to the US for the first time in 5 months. You're exhausted, your sleep schedule is upside down, and all you can think about is getting back to your own bed, your job, your normal routine. You move through the terminal like you've done on previous trips, wait your turn in the immigration line, and when you reach the counter, you hand over your green card. The officer runs it through the scanner. The machine beeps. You're expecting a quick look, a stamp, and something like, "Welcome back." Instead, the officer hesitates. His eyes stay on the screen a little too long. Then he looks up and says, "Please step over here for a moment." Another officer approaches with a tablet in hand and points to a camera. "Look straight ahead. Don't move. Neutral face." A light flashes and your picture is taken. You assume it's just another security step, nothing out of the ordinary. What you don't see is what happens behind that camera. That image is not just a regular photo. It becomes part of a biometric file connected to your identity, your passport, or green card number, and every recorded entry and exit you've made through U.S. borders. And for green card holders, there has been a quiet shift in how this information is being used. As soon as your green card is scanned, the system can immediately pull up your full travel record. Every time you left the country, every time you came back, exactly how many days you've spent outside the U.S. on each trip. This isn't built from messy passport stamps or your memory. It's based on biometric entry-exit data that's now collected automatically at many airports. On the officer's screen next to your name, a number appears. It might show 120 days, or 183, or 210. That number is the length of your most recent time outside the U.S. Once that number crosses certain ranges, the officer's job stops being just routine screening and starts to include a legal judgment. At that point, the officer isn't just verifying that your green card is valid. He has to ask himself a deeper question. Were you simply traveling temporarily, or have you, in practice, stopped living in the United States as your main home? He doesn't have to prove anything in that first interaction. All he has to do is start asking questions. And the way you respond, when you're tired, stressed, and desperate to get out of the airport, can create statements that may later be treated as evidence about your intentions. Many permanent residents assume the main risk lies in the biometric photo itself. In reality, the bigger issue is what the system already knows before you say a word. Your travel timeline is already there, accurate to the day. The officer doesn't really need to ask, "How long were you away?" He can see it instantly. So instead, he can go straight to the more important question. Why were you outside the United States for so long? What you say over the next few minutes can shape whether you walk straight out to baggage claim or get directed to secondary inspection, confronted with paperwork about having possibly abandoned your permanent residence, and suddenly find your future in the U.S. under review. I'm Artur, and in this video I'm going to walk you through what is actually happening at U.S. airports under the expanded biometric entry-exit system, and why green card holders who take longer trips abroad are facing more intensive questioning. I'll break this down in straightforward language so you understand 3 key points: what the system does every time you travel, why extended absences can raise concerns, and how to respond at the border in a way that is honest, but doesn't unnecessarily harm your case. This content is for general education only. It is not legal, immigration, or financial advice. Everyone's situation is different, so please consult a qualified professional about your specific circumstances. Let's start with the technology, because once you understand that, the officer's behavior makes more sense. For years, the U.S. has collected fingerprints from many arriving travelers. That's not new. The major change with the expanded biometric entry-exit program is that facial recognition has become part of the standard process for almost all non-U.S. citizens, tourists, students, temporary workers, and also lawful permanent residents. When you arrive, a camera captures your face. When you leave, another image is taken. Each image is matched to you through biometric software and linked to a specific crossing: the date, the airport, and whether it was an entry or a departure. Over time, this builds a detailed digital record of your movements in and out of the country. These databases are designed to be long-term. According to official policies, many of these records can be stored for years, sometimes decades. Every time you travel, another entry is added to that long-term profile. For short-term visitors, this data helps the government identify people who stay past the validity of their visas. For permanent residents, the question is a little different. It's not usually, did you overstay your visa? It's, are you genuinely living in the United States, or are you effectively based somewhere else and just using your green card to visit periodically? Permanent resident status is based on the idea that the U.S. is your primary home. The expectation in the law is that you live mainly in the U.S. and that time spent abroad is generally temporary in nature. You absolutely can travel. You can go abroad to see family, handle emergencies, look after property, or spend time in your country of origin. Millions of green card holders do this every year without any issue. But when a single trip becomes very long, or when you have a pattern of long trips, especially without planning ahead, officers may start to question where your real home is. This is where the so-called 6-month rule causes so much confusion. A lot of permanent residents believe there is a strict rule that if you're outside the U.S. for more than 6 months, your green card is automatically lost. That is not what the law says. There is no specific day, like day 183, on which your status automatically shuts off. What happens instead is more subtle but still important. Once an absence crosses roughly the 6-month mark, it becomes significantly easier for officers to question whether you have maintained your residence in the U.S. Your time abroad doesn't instantly cancel your status, but it gives the government more room to argue that you might have shifted your main life somewhere else. In the past, figuring out your travel history at the border involved questions and paper stamps. People forgot dates. Some trips were unclear. Passport stamps were missing or hard to read. There was a lot of room for doubt. With biometric entry-exit, much of that uncertainty disappears. When the officer scans your card, the system can show something like, last departure, June 1st. Current arrival, December 10th. Days outside, 192. That's not an estimate. It's a direct calculation from the biometric records. So instead of spending time asking when you left, the officer can go straight to evaluating why you were gone that long and whether the trip looks truly temporary or like a relocation. This is exactly where many green card holders unintentionally put themselves in a weaker position. They think the best way to stay safe is to tell every detail of their story. My mother was very ill. I had to stay and help. Then my business ran into problems. Then ticket prices were high. Then my sibling needed me. I always planned to return, but one problem came after another. From a human standpoint, that is completely understandable. But in an immigration context, your detailed story is not typed up word for word. Officers are trained to write short factual notes about what you say. Instead of a full emotional account, the official record might just say, traveler remained abroad to care for family member. Traveler stayed overseas to manage business and property. Later on, those short lines can be read as evidence of strong family and economic ties outside the U.S. and daily life increasingly centered abroad. Even a comment like, I didn't realize how long I was away can be summarized in a report as traveler unaware of permanent resident residency responsibilities. This doesn't mean you should hide the truth. Giving false information to an immigration officer can lead to much more serious problems. The issue isn't honesty. The issue is how your honesty is presented and recorded. Long, emotional explanations given when you're worn out from a flight tend to highlight everything about your life abroad and much less about your ongoing connection to the United States. When those statements are combined with a clearly documented long absence from the biometric system, an officer, or later an immigration judge, may conclude that you effectively stopped living in the U.S., even if you didn't intend that outcome. When U.S. immigration law decides whether someone has abandoned permanent residence, it doesn't usually turn on a single factor. Instead, it looks at what's called the totality of the circumstances, the full picture of your life. Some of the key questions include, do you work in the United States or have a U.S.-based business? Did you keep a home or apartment here while you were away? Are you filing U.S. tax returns as a resident? Is your spouse or are your children living in the U.S.? Do you have active U.S. bank accounts, bills, and regular financial commitments here? Throughout your time abroad, did you intend to return and continue living in the U.S. as your main home? These details can be very powerful. Consider two people who were each outside the U.S. for 7 months. Person 1 stayed abroad to care for a sick parent but kept their job in the U.S., maintained their apartment, and filed their U.S. tax return as usual. Person 2 also stayed abroad for 7 months but closed their U.S. accounts, ended their lease, and started working full-time in another country. Same length of absence. Completely different story in the eyes of the law. The difficulty is that the airport is not designed to hear your entire life history. You don't have hours, you don't usually have supporting documents ready, and you don't have a judge in front of you. You have a few minutes, usually after a long journey, with an officer who has to make a quick decision under time pressure. That's why many immigration lawyers suggest a very simple communication strategy for permanent residents returning from extended trips. Stay calm, be honest, answer only the specific question you are asked, and keep your answers focused on the fact that your primary residence remains in the United States. Think of it as intentional, controlled communication. If the officer asks, "Why were you outside the U.S. for 6.5 months?" a focused answer could be, "I was with family and handling some personal matters, but my home and main life are in the United States, and I always plan to come back." You've told the truth. You haven't turned it into a long speech, and you've clearly stated the point that matters most legally. Your primary residence is in the U.S., and the trip was temporary. If the officer then asks, "What ties do you have in the U.S.?" that's your moment to list them briefly and concretely. Your job, your lease or home, your spouse or children, your regular bills, your tax filings, and so on. You don't need to argue, and you don't need to go into every emotional detail about your time abroad. Just calmly state the specific facts that show your life is rooted in the United States. Short, factual responses accomplish two goals at once. They show cooperation, and they keep the focus on the legal question that really matters: your ongoing residence in the U.S. Even if you answer calmly and clearly, the officer might still send you to secondary inspection. You'll be directed to another waiting area, asked to sit, and your case will be reviewed more carefully. This can be uncomfortable, but being sent to secondary inspection alone does not mean you're losing your green card. It usually means the officer wants more time or a supervisor's input before making a decision. In secondary, the questions can become more detailed. They may ask again about your trip, your work, where you live, your family situation. Often, the officer will be typing while you speak. This is the point where many travelers become so anxious that they just want everything to be over as fast as possible. Some people end up signing forms without really understanding them, just to get out of the room or even to get back on a plane and leave the U.S. One of the most serious documents that can appear in this situation is a form where you voluntarily give up your permanent resident status. In practice, signing that kind of form is the same as agreeing to surrender your green card. Many people later say they did not fully realize the impact of what they signed. They were overwhelmed and just wanted the stress to stop. Most immigration attorneys strongly warn against signing any document that gives up your permanent residence unless you genuinely intend to abandon your status and understand the consequences very clearly. If an officer suggests that you should sign something like that, and you want to keep your green card, you can respond calmly with something like, "I do not wish to give up my permanent resident status. I would like to speak with an immigration attorney or have this decided by an immigration judge." You are not refusing to cooperate. You are asking for a formal review of your situation through the legal process rather than making a rushed decision at the airport. As a green card holder, you generally have the right to have serious disputes about your status reviewed in immigration court instead of having everything decided on the spot at the border. In court, an immigration judge can consider the full context: your biometric travel record, your employment, tax filings, housing, family situation, and any supporting documents you can provide. In many cases, people who faced tough questioning at the airport were later able to demonstrate in court that they had not abandoned their residence because their ties to the U.S. remained strong and their trip, though long, was still temporary. That system exists because the law recognizes that life is complicated. A single long trip by itself should not automatically erase years of residence unless the broader facts clearly show that you have moved your life somewhere else. Hearing all this, you might be thinking, Maybe the safest option is just never to leave the U.S. But that's not realistic for most people. Parents and grandparents grow older and may need care. Relatives get sick. Important life events like weddings or funerals happen overseas. Businesses and properties in your home country may need your attention. Emergencies rarely respect your immigration status. For many permanent residents, international travel is not optional. It's part of their responsibilities. The goal is not to keep you locked inside the U.S. The goal is to help you travel in an informed way, understanding what the system sees and how your decisions might be interpreted. If you already know that you may need to be outside the U.S. for an extended period, many months or close to a year or more, there are tools that may reduce the risk. One of the most important is a reentry permit. This is a document you apply for while you're physically in the U.S. before you leave. It doesn't give you unlimited freedom to stay away indefinitely, but it does show that you notified the U.S. government in advance that you planned a long trip and that you intended to keep your U.S. residence. When you return and present both your green card and a valid reentry permit, officers often view your case differently than if you show up after a long absence with no prior preparation. Beyond formal paperwork, your everyday choices also matter a lot. If you expect to be gone for several months, ask yourself questions like, can I continue my lease or keep my home in the U.S.? Can I maintain my employment relationship or a clear connection to a U.S. employer? Am I continuing to file U.S. tax returns as a resident? Are my main bank accounts, driver's license, and mailing address still in the United States? These are exactly the kinds of facts officers and judges look at when they evaluate whether someone's true home is still in the U.S. If your plans change while you're abroad, say a 2-month visit turns into an 8-month stay, talking to a qualified immigration attorney before you travel back to the U.S. can be very helpful. Even a short consultation can help you understand how your particular situation might be viewed, what documents to bring, and how to explain your circumstances at the border. Preparing before you stand at the inspection counter is almost always easier than trying to fix a problem that has already started at the airport. Stepping back, the biometric entry-exit system is part of a broader change in how borders work. For a long time, border control was based mainly on paper documents, passports, ink stamps, and quick questions. Now it's increasingly based on data, facial recognition, digital travel histories, and interconnected databases. From the government side, this can make the process more efficient and accurate. There's less guessing about where you've been. From a traveler's side, it means your travel patterns are visible in a way they never used to be. Long absences stand out instantly. Repeated long trips can begin to look like a pattern instead of an occasional exception. This does not mean permanent residents are being forbidden from traveling. What it does mean is that some of the old assumptions, like my green card protects me no matter how long I stay abroad, or if I tell a long emotional story, they'll just understand, are now much less reliable. The system already knows how many days you've been away. Officers are trained to look for signs that someone may have shifted their main residence overseas. Your role is to arrive prepared, with your facts organized and your communication under control. So let's return to that scene at JFK. You've just landed. You're tired. Your green card is scanned. The camera flashes. Somewhere in a database, your last departure and today's arrival are matched, and a number appears showing the exact length of your trip. Maybe a small notice pops up because your absence went beyond 6 months. The officer looks at you and asks, "Why were you outside the United States for so long?" If you didn't understand any of this, that question might feel like a sudden trap. You might panic, talk too much, agree to something you don't fully grasp, or leave the airport with a problem that could have been avoided. If you do understand how the system works, that same moment looks very different. You know the officer can already see your travel timeline. You know that a long absence invites questions about residence, not an automatic cancellation of your status. You know that the law looks at the full picture of your life, not just one trip. And you know that your strongest protection is to answer calmly, truthfully, and briefly, while clearly emphasizing what matters most. Your home, work, family, and daily life are in the United States, and your time abroad was temporary. Information doesn't eliminate every risk, but it completely changes your position. Instead of being surprised at the border, you approach that counter already aware of what's on the screen and how your words might be written down. In a world where immigration systems are becoming more automated and data-driven every year, that kind of preparation is one of the most effective tools you can have. If you know other green card holders who travel frequently or are planning extended trips for family or work reasons, consider sharing this information with them before they fly. Many people only learn about these issues after they've already been flagged, and by then it can be much more difficult to fix the situation. Staying informed, planning ahead, and understanding your rights can help protect not just a single trip, but your long-term ability to live, work, and build a life in the United States. I'm Artur, and I'll see you in the next video.